Good afternoon, and welcome to this webinar sponsored by the Western Center for Metropolitan Extension and Research. My name is Martha Aitken. I'm a Senior Associate for Metropolitan Extension with Washington State University, and I'm so pleased to be your host for this broadcast. The Western Center was established by the Western Extension Directors Association with funding from the extension programs of the University of Alaska Fairbanks, University of California, Colorado State University, University of Idaho, Oregon State University, and Washington State University, who hosts the broadcast, and the center. Before we get started, if you haven't used GoToWebinar before, I'd like to go over a few useful features. The webinar will work best on your computer if you close other applications while you participate. On the menu bar, the blue screen button lets you toggle between a full screen and partial screen. If you want to view the webinar at full screen, you will want to toggle back to enter a question in the questions pod. The orange arrow opens and hides your control panel. You may enter your questions into the question pod at any time. However, we will wait until the end of the program to ask questions of our presenter. Our webinar today is being recorded for later viewing. The Western Center was established to increase the internal capacity of extension programs to address metropolitan issues and to elevate the stature and value of cooperative extension to external metropolitan audiences. The overarching goal of the Western Center is to help extension better align programs with the needs, issues, and interests of their metropolitan constituency. The center believes that to be successful, extension professionals need essential skills to thrive in today's diverse and complex metropolitan communities, such as the ability to work across generations and the skills to work within multi-stakeholder collaborations. To reach this goal, the center provides professional development opportunities through staff exchanges, webinars, and workshops. The center has a two-pronged research agenda to conduct research on effective metropolitan organizational and staffing models and best practices in programming, delivery, and evaluation, and to explore emerging metropolitan issues so that land-grant universities can help communities make informed decisions and develop sound and equitable policies. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce today's presentation, Leadership in the City with Julie Fox. Julie
Thank you very much.
Whoops. Can I give you an intro, Julie?
Sure.
At least I know you're here. So. Julie is an associate professor with the Ohio State University College of Food, Agriculture, and Environmental Sciences. Julie serves as the OSU Extension in the City Program Leader, Central Region Extension Director, and Associate Chair for the Department of Extension. Working with OSU since 1998, she holds a PhD in Human and Community Resource Development and an MBA in Global Management. Julie, I'm happy that you're here with me today. Welcome to the webinar.
Thank you very much, Martha. Sorry I jumped in a little bit early there. I guess
no,
I'm
that's
excited
okay.
to visit with
I'm
people today.
I'm not seeing your screen yet, so I think you just need to give us permission here.
Okay.
There we go. Perfect.
Okay, great. Does it appear just the way you'd like it?
Exactly.
All right.
The floor is yours, Julie. Thank you.
Thank you. And good morning or good afternoon to each of you. Today's presentation, I'm from Ohio State, the Ohio State University, but always happy to partner with the Western Center and also represent the National Urban Extension Leaders. So happy to be a part of today's webinar. We're going to talk a little bit today about why leadership in the city, why this is an important topic. Talk about leadership, what we can learn from theory and practice and apply to extension. So we've done a bit of research there, so we'll talk about that. And then based on that, what kind of professional development can we provide for leaders serving in the extension area urban extension areas, and what kind of competencies would that professional development be based upon. I'll close the session then with what's ahead, and we'll have questions and answers. So why leadership in the city? I think everybody here on this webinar is familiar with the population shift from rural to urban areas. And really the focus on leadership in the city is to better prepare extension professionals working in our largest cities. And rather than do what I would consider kind of a one-off or a leadership hack even, from my Central Region Director role as well as my leadership of OSU Extension the City, I was really looking for a comprehensive competency-based approach to help those leaders in the cities improve be more prepared with the work that they were doing. The other part here is really aligning it with the research as well as the National Urban Extension Framework that Newell has prepared. So again, kind of taking a comprehensive approach to this, because whether you're looking at, metropolitan areas, if you want to use that term, you're looking at urban influence codes and you want to talk about urban versus metro or city, or even regionally, clearly that population is growing, and this why leadership in the city question is to better link the extension mission with the unique aspects of metropolitan communities. So really that link between our mission and the metro areas is the purpose of this. So to begin, who is an extension leader? They could be regional or state leaders. They could be county extension directors or program and project leaders. So what I'm seeing is in some states we have positions of county extension directors without any programmatic responsibility who are leading in those large counties. I see program or project leaders focus on specific issues such as urban agriculture. And so rather than dictate kind of who's a leader, who's not a leader, I think we can be inclusive in this sense. I had a regional meeting with all of my educators yesterday. We call them educators, not agents. And one of the young people said, it doesn't matter about position. We can all be leaders. And I thought that was so refreshing and so correct. The reason I have County Extension Director in bold here is we're doing a little bit of research specifically with that job category or job title, but it certainly doesn't mean that it's exclusive of other leaders in the city. So looking at leadership, that theory practice piece and what we can apply to extension. I've been investigating general management and leadership literature and then looking at competencies related to public, nonprofit, even higher education leadership context. And what I came to, a couple years ago when I started my position with our administrative cabinet is this concept or construct of entrepreneurial leadership. And that intersection between leadership literature and practice and entrepreneurship. So there are a couple good references there for you that not only look at that intersection but also from a cross-cultural perspective, and Schumpeter's work from his entrepreneurial perspective applied to leadership. There are many other resources, but those are a couple. And so for me, in the approach that we are taking in our cities, looking at providing that as the basis of our framework for this leadership in the city. So why entrepreneurial leadership? Because of the increasingly diverse constituency that we serve, new technologies that we have for both communications as well as education, changes in traditional funding. We see that more in our cities than any other place with diverse portfolios with different timelines. When I met with my team yesterday, we had some counties who still have a traditional funding model of county, state, and federal. I think it's a terrific base for us, an extension. It's served us well for over 100 years. And then I have some other counties that have that diverse portfolio, and so they talk about local, state, and federal funding, and that local piece is a mix of public and private sources. It's grants, contracts, gifts, and fees. So we've had some changes in traditional funding based on some opportunities and needs in our cities. Also that entrepreneurial approach because of the complex issues and uncertain times. So things continue to change at a pretty rapid pace, and there is this need to identify opportunities beyond our existing competencies so that Extension can continue to thrive as we move forward. So taking that and moving toward a professional development piece, I piloted a program called Leadership in the City in Ohio, and we're right now revising that for a national audience, and we'll then do a peer review and release that next year. But the approach that we took was we have that flipped learning where the participants have information ahead of time and do their assignments, if you will. Then we get together, we share and exchange, and then they continue to apply that learning in their work. So we take that flipped approach to really help improve not only their knowledge and skills, but also their behaviors for what we call co-discovery for collective impact in large cities. And that co-discovery concept is that we approach our work in the cities of, yes, we do have unbiased research-based university information, but we also really respect local knowledge. And we see how those things come together in a meaningful, relevant way for the people of our cities. And the term collective impact I use pretty liberally here. It's not necessarily in the formal sense with the structure of a backbone organization and the full meaning of collective impact. But that's really our approach to our work in our cities. So with Leadership in the City curriculum, we recognize that there are large cities, and so how can we begin to make a difference, even a bigger difference than we have in the approaches that we've taken in the past. So we look at entrepreneurial leadership as the first part or section of this program, Entrepreneurial Networks as the second part of that, and then Entrepreneurial Innovation. So let me show you a little bit about what I mean by that. So with entrepreneurial leadership, within this first section there are really three modules. The first one, helping participants understand their own approach to entrepreneurial leadership and what that means, that intersection between those two. And then looking at city context. For some people leading in the cities, they're coming from either outside of a city and still familiar with Extension, or they're coming from within the city and they're not familiar with Extension. So that city context and cultural competence is one piece of that. And then for the next section, it's really that land grant university extension context. This is especially helpful for professionals coming to Extension now from outside of Extension without that knowledge base and years of historical perspective. But I found that it is also useful for people who are working in our cities who have a traditional understanding of Extension but don't have that rich context of the whole national and their own universities resources that they have. So we try to introduce that at the beginning and then integrate that throughout the curriculum. So with entrepreneurial leadership, the first module, within that we look at the participant as an entrepreneurial leader. And this is really when you look at the competency piece of that, those personal skills. And then the second part of that are entrepreneurial teams. And within the leadership dimension, looking at distributed or collaborative leadership. So this takes it, I guess to a couple levels, with the third being entrepreneurial organizations. Within leadership, there are some theories that look at the dynamic individual or hero perspective, but then there's supportive literature that talks about entrepreneurial teams. And in the city context, this is especially appropriate because we have larger teams of people working with a larger number of organizations, and many of those being large themselves. And so this team approach, I think, is of value in this first section. And then with entrepreneurial organizations, looking to the literature on that so that they see how these things come together, that this entrepreneurial leadership approach has their competencies, it has team competencies, and also some organizational competencies. So the second part of this first section is that city context and cultural competence. So let's look at that. So with this module, I actually introduced the concept of better understanding their cities. Some people have been so busy working on particular projects that I want them to step back for a moment and see all of the information that's available on their city, from demographics to the geography to the history of that, and then also our history in that city. In some of our cities, we've had a long-standing presence And in other cities, we've had fluctuating presence in the city. And so I think that's an important part of their context, their starting point. And then looking at existing secondary data on expressed needs in the city, trends and forecast, understanding the complexity. For example, some cities have numerous jurisdictions or multiple jurisdictions they're dealing with, and also kind of that competitive nature of who else provides some of the things that we're providing in the city. Then what makes their city unique? Every city has something unique to offer, and it's fun to include that and celebrate that. And then as they look ahead based on that data, helping them understand opportunity identification, because there's so much opportunity, there's so much need that we really in the city cannot be all things to all people. And so helping them have that context so that they can then put in a process for operating or identifying opportunities. And then within this module, we also talk about cultural competence because of the rich diversity that we have in the cities and the concept of inclusion. And for me, this idea of cultural competence, I've learned over the last couple years is some of us have a traditional understanding of that. And if you lay on top of that this extension culture versus people coming to extension from outside of extension who aren't yet familiar with this extension culture, it can be important to have that discussion so that we really do take an inclusive approach from the time that we serve clients to the time that we hire new people to retaining both clients and people that work internally. So that's the second module within entrepreneurial leadership. And then the next part of that is that land-grant university extension context where they understand how the Extension Committee on Organization and Policy, or ECOP, fits within the national system. We talk not just about LGUs or land-grant universities, but also urban-serving universities, Carnegie-engaged universities, so that they see this bigger picture. For us, we also talk about our specific university so that they begin to see the broad scope of resources that might be available to them through outreach and engagement. Then we talk about the history of urban extension. We have a really neat interactive timeline and have scanned numerous documents from all the past national urban extension conferences and some rich documents, and just not to get them drowning in the history of urban extension, but to have that context so that then when they look at the National Urban Extension Framework document that the National Urban Extension leaders prepared this past year, that we have that framework to operate within, which can help them as they look at those opportunities or identifying those opportunities. So that's the first section, that entrepreneurial leadership with them as entrepreneurial leaders, the city context, and the land-grant university context. So then the next section has three different modules within that as well, and it's Entrepreneurial Networks. This is working with elected public officials as well as public and private partners and city advisory groups. And this is where that first section really kind of looked at their personal competencies, and now this gets more into their interpersonal competencies. So working with elected public officials, for us the biggest challenge has been just the sheer number of people to have relationships with. We looked here in Ohio, and over 50% of our House and Senate members are in I think 8 or 10 of our 88 counties, and so we have our hands full managing those relationships with all of their staff as well as with those representatives. And then, as I mentioned earlier, that local piece doesn't just mean working with county commissioners, and so it's often working with city mayors and other elected officials in our large urban counties. So we talk about what that means, and then make sure that the city leader is familiar that the University Extension system has support units. We have a government relations office within Extension, within our college, within our university, and they provide us with great resources, some education, and we're integrated in the work that we do. The other unit that we work with for this is marketing communications, hand in hand with our government relations office. But here it's really important that the city leader understand their role, that we don't lobby, that we do focus on the impact of our work, that we talk about education and not making specific asks in this case with public officials. So that's I think an important module, knowing the rich history that Extension has with local, state, and federal funding, and making sure that our leaders in the city understand the opportunity, the role, and they feel like they can build the relationships that they have in the city. The second part, or the second module within the second part of Entrepreneurial Networks is working with public and private partners. So in collaborating with them, to me, it's why do we do that? A big part of it is to access capital. And sometimes we refer to this as grants, contracts, gifts, and fees. But if you look at the community capitals framework that sometimes we look at within the community development program of Extension, you see that it's financial capital, built capital, political capital, social capital. Social capital is probably one of the biggest pieces that you can get here. The human capital, accessing additional human resources, the cultural, the natural. So for working with public and private partners with this entrepreneurial approach, one of the things with being entrepreneurial is you don't operate based on constraints of existing resources. So this module is really important as the leader works with the support units of our business office, our legal office, our office of research, our advancement or development office. Different states call it different things. One of our cities just received a $5 million gift for facilities. And we have a lot of other things developing when it comes to the advancement piece of that. And then also, again, marketing communications and our outreach and engagement office. In my state, at The Ohio State University, outreach and engagement is not within our college, and Extension is not within outreach and engagement. I know that's different from state to state and from city to city, but we really work closely with them, and an important support unit from the university. So the last piece of this I didn't actually have in the pilot program that I did in Ohio, and my city leaders said, hey, we need to include this here. So in listening to them and working with them, these city advisory groups are all different stages of development. For some of our counties, they have not been very active, and from some of our counties, they're very strategically developing. The people on those committees and groups are strategically chosen and work really efficiently and well together. If you think back to the social or the capitals slide that I showed you earlier, that social capital is a big piece of this too. But really looking at what's the purpose of the advisory group, the people who are involved and selected and their terms, and that process, how often they meet, when they meet, and really getting them engaged in the work of city extension. And so, with this, it's an opportunity for us to take a strategic approach in the city, similar to what we do in urban and suburban counties throughout our state, but really look at what's unique in our cities. Again, because of the complexity, because of the sheer size, you can't have every organization represented on your advisory group. So really looking strategically, how that makes sense. I also have helped the people, the city leaders that I'm working with, identify those groups where they serve as an advisory member of other groups throughout the city. And we talk about, being at the table. And this can be a challenge in the city. There's a lot of tables. I sometimes joke that you could never eat a meal alone if you didn't want to. You could have a breakfast, lunch, and meeting dinner. And then even last night, our Metropolitan Club had an after-hours thing. And so you think, all right, how can we do this? So this idea of really looking strategically about who's on our advisory committee and then where we serve on those advisory committees is what we talk about in this module. So that's the second portion of it, the entrepreneurial networks piece. The next one is entrepreneurial innovation, and this is where we look at program, project, and product development. So why do I have all of those words there? because sometimes in extension we talk about program as big P or program little p. We call seemingly everything programs. And what we're finding in urban extension is sometimes the solution is not a program. Sometimes the solution is a project. In some of our neighborhoods, we'll do a project. Sometimes it's just a pilot project with our 4-H youth development groups. Those leaders just did a 5-neighborhood special interest club project, and which concluded this week, and it was fun to see the evaluation and the feedback from the participants, the volunteers, as well as the 4-H youth. So that projects give us an opportunity to provide a bite-sized piece of it, extension. So people, volunteers, and participants aren't signing up for a program or a volunteer for life. So sometimes the opportunity is a project, or the solution is a project. In other cases, it's a product. So, for example, we were working with a neighborhood on an urban food systems project and had some HUD funding to work on this. And what we saw was an opportunity to create an urban food systems guide, and that was relevant to that neighborhood project. And so that was a product that lived on, and that publication was so well received in that neighborhood. Others around the state said, hey, could you please modify this so it's relevant for us statewide? And so it is in a second edition from a statewide perspective. So as city leaders, we have to work with people to understand this changing way of approaching solutions. That extension doesn't always have to be a complete program. It may fit within a program, a project may fit, or a product might fit within a program, but this requires us to have different resources to complete it and different timelines. So just having those conversations, not everything needs a full logic model, if you will. So I can't see you guys smiling across the screen here, but maybe some of you know what I'm saying. So let's look at the program, project, and product development piece. It's not just understanding what's the right solution there, because a product could lead to a project that could then lead to a program. That's great. But also understanding the innovation process and what that means. That I joked a little bit that we don't always need a full logic model, but really what's that innovation process that we use. In Extension, we're very good at, in many instances, doing a needs assessment and developing programs related to that. And I think we can learn a lot from kind of more rapid response. We have some rapid response teams working on projects and products. So what does that innovation process look like? This is one that I've referred to during my dissertation process, well, 10 plus years ago now. But really that opportunity identification, then the innovation piece of it, and then strategically how to implement and then operationalize what you're doing. And the other words here on that slide is, yes, there's changing environment, yes, there's continuous individual and organizational learning and decision making, and the entrepreneurial orientation and entrepreneurial management piece is kind of that entrepreneurial organization dimension that's brought to the process. So that kind of structurally looks at one perspective of an innovation process. But within this section or module, there are additional university extension support units. We have program leaders and program specialists. We have cross-campus collaborators. We have a program development and evaluation unit. I think across the country within our extension systems there might be named different things, but some resources that way. And then also we have some education technology leaders so that we can look at some creative options of what we want to do. For example, in one city we thought, well, why don't we just develop a small product, and the product was a series of short videos. And that provided a nice bite-sized piece of extension that then led to some other things. So that's the first module with entrepreneurial innovation. Then looking at communication in the city. And there's actually an urban communications foundation, which I thought was interesting to see, what's unique about communication in the city. For us in our cities, we recognize that there are a lot of audiences and there are a diverse group of influencers. And by influencers, I mean traditional media, I mean bloggers, I mean neighborhood events. So when we think about the audiences we serve and the influencers to be a part of our messaging and relationship building with those audiences, that's really our external approach. But sometimes we forget that we also have a lot of internal marketing and communications. And in our cities, that especially as the team grows, we have rapid growth in some of our city teams, and so just that internal marketing so that people are all operating on the same page. There's good interaction between the entrepreneurial team members. By that I mean we have many people in the city at a number of tables, and they're all building relationships with people from a lot of diverse groups. So how do we keep those internal communications going so that we have a really efficient team, that the people in the community see us as one unit? So that I think that internal marketing piece we need to pay attention to. We have some good support units. Again, marketing and communications and our IT group can help us with both our internal and external marketing. Research and publishing. This isn't necessarily a priority for all city extension leaders. Where I see this is those who have a specialization such as urban agriculture or urban food systems, for example, where they're looking at their area of expertise, they're working with collaborators, and they're doing research and publishing that is locally relevant to their cities, that in some cases is responsive statewide, and in some cases is recognized nationally. And those are three themes within the National Urban Extension Leaders, and we've adopted those here in our state. And I think this is important because sometimes we have researchers that are just doing things that are recognized nationally and not relevant locally. And the neat part is when you're relevant locally, responsive statewide, and recognized nationally, is it attracts resources from all three levels, that local, state, and a national perspective. So again, this is not necessarily a factor for every extension leader. Our county extension directors, this is not a priority for them. But I want them to understand the process and how that fits for the other team members that they're working with who do have that specialization. And then entrepreneurial innovation, resources, risk, and reports. So this is kind of the managing of some important factors that can be a challenge for our city leaders. It's that resource acquisition, alignment, and management. It's the risk management, identification, and management. The reporting purposes and processes, reporting to different funders, reporting internally for different things, reporting for the federal report. So it's important that they understand that resource, risk, and reporting factor of being a leader. Some people might argue the difference between management and leadership, but you take something like resource acquisition and you can take a very entrepreneurial approach to that. Our city leaders do. And really understanding that if you just shift alignment a little bit, what a difference things can make. So while I use the term management, I hope you still understand that the context, underlying context, is that entrepreneurial leadership approach. Some university extension support units we work with, again, our business office, human resources is critical for us. Real estate and our legal office. With human resources, for example, we're trying to see how we can gain some efficiencies. With all of our extension personnel and volunteers, we have pretty specific volunteer background checks, for staff and for volunteers, some background checks and some training to do. And so with product and project development, it can be a real challenge to have, let's say, a student intern come in for a period of for one semester, and by the time I get all that paperwork done, sometimes I've lost time. Or if I try to rehire somebody for a project that is a retired faculty member. So we're working on a decision tree so that the city leaders can say, okay, here are her human resources. The solution is not always, I need to hire a full-time person, or I need to hire a program assistant or that kind of thing. I want the city leaders to begin to see, look at all the human resource options out there, and look at the efficient process that we now have in place to tap into them. Because what we were finding is that our city leaders were not experiencing those efficiencies, and so it really was a drain on their energy to bring in or realign human resources. So we're working hand in hand with our human resources office so they better understand our city context as well. So with that program, that Entrepreneurial Leadership, Entrepreneurial Networks, Entrepreneurial Innovation, we're trying to better now take a look at that curriculum and see how the competencies of urban extension professionals lay into this, and make sure we don't have some gaps when when we're addressing those important competencies. But what's unique about their competencies in the city? So we're working with eExtension and EduWorks right now to do a competency framework development for County Extension Director position. So we'll have that done by the end of this calendar year. But I think it's interesting, there's a lot of different definitions of competencies, but this one I thought was appropriate for urban extension in that one definition was an organism's ability to interact effectively with its environment. And I thought, yep, that's what makes it unique in the cities. But there was some research done early in 1985 specifically to urban extension competencies. We've done a literature review and looked at competencies from program-specific areas to general, to leadership, to the 21st century extension professional, and really laid all those on top of each other to see what's in common with those personal competencies, interpersonal competencies, and what I call the business of extension. So in addition to individual competencies, we're also looking at organizational competencies because of that entrepreneurial organization context that I've mentioned. So kind of this is the cross-organizational core competencies that integrate business execution and management alignment. So a lot of this comes into play in that third section of leadership in the city, looking at personnel structure and recognition so that we can retain great talent, looking at policies and procedures and processes like the human resource example that I mentioned, and looking at intra-organization support units that we've integrated into leadership in the city, and then also our inter-organization practices. This is a, if you think back to that grid that I showed on the entrepreneurial process with innovation being a piece of that, and I had those terms, entrepreneurial orientation, entrepreneurial management. So what I've done is look at the research from those two dimensions and combine them into what is called organizational entrepreneurship. So when we talk about those competencies, there are actually measures that look at how innovative our organization systems are, how proactive we are, and risk-taking. That's within entrepreneurial orientation, rather. And then you can see the 5 dimensions within entrepreneurial management. So if we look at those specific factors, instead of talking about organizational entrepreneurship from a theoretical perspective, if we look at those factors, then we can begin to see, okay, not only how can we develop individuals for leadership in the city, but what can we do as an organization to support them in their work. So what's ahead? I mentioned the competency framework development piece that we're doing. Many of you, I think, are probably aware the National Urban Extension Conference is May 17th in Minnesota. The call for proposals is out, and I encourage you to take a look at that if you haven't already. The Journal of Human Sciences and Extension will be having an urban extension themed issue in May 17. So we'll be sharing some of the findings of our ongoing research about urban personnel competencies through that, but we have about 11 articles, I think, for that themed issue, and that's in addition to many of the great works that's in the Journal of Extension. There's outside of extension, I think we've gleaned a lot of good information that we apply. That's ongoing. FYI is for your improvement. They're a global leader when it comes to competencies. One of our government offices that manages personnel has some great senior executive competency work. And then what was recently announced is Bloomberg and Harvard have a partnership for city leadership initiatives specifically for mayors. So I think it'll be good to see how that evolves and where we might have some potential overlay with what they're teaching. It's still early on. They're hiring some staff, and it's a very well-funded program. But you know, from the public and private sector, there are a lot of different leadership programs out there, and this Leadership in the City course that will be available next year based on the outline I presented today, it is not necessarily instead of many of the good leadership resources and opportunities out there. This program does not go into in-depth assessments like a regional extension leadership program or our Lead 21 program that our land-grant university system has. Great, rich 2-year experience in those types of programs. Many of our organizations bring in leadership speakers, so this is really intended to look at the unique needs of extension in the city and to better prepare extension professionals to succeed. So in summary, we talked about why leadership in the city. Well, that's to link our extension mission to our metro areas. Why leadership? Why this is an important topic. Really looking at theory and practice and how we can apply that to our urban extension work. And then with the professional development piece, having a competency-based program for urban extension leaders rather than just a single solution. What's ahead? Lots of opportunities, as I mentioned. I look forward to having some dialogue, some questions and answers with you right now, and I hope to meet many of you face-to-face in Minnesota and maybe get engaged with you on some of these other projects.
Thank you, Julie. And to those of you listening, I invite you all to enter your questions into the questions pod, and I will read those to Julie. And while folks are doing that, Julie, I've got a question. If you had to pick one, what do you think is the single biggest challenge for an urban extension leader?
Wow, that's a good question. The single biggest. I would have to say, knowing my city leaders, it would probably be wishing they had only one single biggest. They would probably want to to have just one single biggest. But I think the complexity, because that complexity is within the city context. That complexity is with working within our university context. That complexity in our partnerships, and the complexity of being innovative and managing and multiple resources and responsibilities. So I know that I tied more than one single biggest issue in that, but I'm kind of smiling thinking about my city leaders, thinking, well, they probably wish they had only one, but if I were to boil it down, it would be that complexity, that daily complexity they address.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Julie. That makes a lot of sense. Here's a question. I need help now. What can I do to be a better leader of urban extension?
Well, I can understand that need because I hear it from the people that I'm working with in our cities. And I would say reference the National Urban Extension Framework. I think that our steering committee from Newell put together a meaningful plan of action. I mentioned earlier that I've had this position for since 2014, so it's just been a couple years, and I did do a document review to say, why have we had this ebb and flow in extension? And I look at our urban extension leaders, and we've had turnover that I'd rather not have. I'd rather retain some of these great leaders we have in our cities. And so in looking at all of those reports that have been done on urban extension, some common themes have risen from that, and that is, how do we position extension in our cities? How do we, what kind of programming, how do we address programming in our cities, the personnel in our cities? And so if you look at, and then there's a fourth one as well, but if you look at that National Urban Extension Framework, see where for you strategically you can make a difference. Because from our history in our state, sometimes we would address one part of that strategy and we wouldn't address the others. And so if I were to do one thing right now, I would become familiar with that and then see, you know, where you would go, but not necessarily just focus on one particular thing, but understand that strategy so that when you do take one step or make one priority, that you recognize that it's in the scope of that larger strategy.
Thanks, Julie. Someone's written in a question here. Can you talk more about having programs that don't have a complete logic model, for example?
Okay, so instead of doing a logic model, we do an entrepreneurial approach where you would do a case. So right now we have a Connect and Collaborate grant program. And I think the total on it, it's university-wide now, with Extension being a driver of it and an investor in it, and it's about $1 million. And so instead of people putting together full proposals for either a planning grant for a program, an implementation program grant, or an expansion of a program, the initial phase is 2 pages. And we're not going to the full Shark Tank approach to assess which ones will be funded or to go to the next level. But then that next level is they work with some experts to help them make it successful. They take the 2-pager, and instead of doing a traditional full-blown proposal, they could do a $100,000 implementation or expansion grant and have some people by their side to help them make it really successful. So it's a different approach. That is, I guess, one example of a different approach.
Thanks, Julie. And let's see, I'm going to have one last call for questions here before we depart. Sounds to me like you've covered the topic quite thoroughly, so I think we will go ahead and then wrap it up.
All right. Well, you all have my email address. Feel free to contact me. I'd be happy to visit with you more. And as you can see, there are a lot of things emerging right now, and be happy to have you be a part of that.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you so much, and thank you all for participating in the webinar today, which was offered at no charge through the support of contributing members to the Western Center for Metropolitan Extension and Research. This webinar has been recorded and will be available next week on the Western Center website, metroextension.wsu.edu. Make sure you join our mailing list to receive announcements about our upcoming webinars and workshops. Go to the WCMER website, metroextension.wsu.edu, and click on subscribe. Once you exit this webinar, we will launch a brief survey. Please take a moment to fill it out to let us know what you thought about today's webinar and what you want to learn about in future webinars. That concludes our webinar for September 29th, 2016. On behalf of the Western Center for Metropolitan Extension and Research and our presenter, Julie Fox, I do thank you for joining us. You all have a wonderful afternoon.